Final speaker, Tim Eden, speaking against the motion.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I recently was at the Edinburgh Book Festival and enjoyed a debate in which I participated with other writers. And Irving Welsh from Trainspotting gave an interesting talk, and he said at the end he agreed with everything everybody else had said. Clearly I do. Andy Haynes laid out the principles, and we're talking about partnerships. Now, in common parlance, partnerships in this country at the moment means marriage. But sadly, marriages too often end up in acrimonious divorce. And this is my worry about global development. If I show you the first slide, my sort of involvement in all of these partnerships, where we link high-income and low-income hospitals around the world, dealing primarily with children's cancer. And you may say, why do we deal with cancer? And I'll explain that in a minute. However, that shows that I'm a globalist and internationalist. So I believe in partnerships. But the devil is in the detail. Who do we help? Why do we decide we go to a particular country? And how do we decide? Political expediency. Certainly governments decide principally, no matter how we talk about it, on the basis of whether it fits with foreign policy and with markets. Are we invited to join in these projects? Is it a true partnership? Liz has given a beautiful example of why that should be so, and I totally agree with what she says. Do we check when we go to those places whether other people are aiding? We were considering a partnership with Ukraine, and we found that 3 other hospitals, institutions there were giving money to the same hospital, and they did not know. Unstructured aid is not helpful. Do we carry out a visit before we decide whether we're going to fund, decide whether on the ground there are the features? And I'll come back to that. Do we monitor both professional and financial governance? And is long-term sustainability built in from the beginning? A lot has been made of the tremendous development, massive expenditure, huge initiative on under 5 mortality. In the last 20 years, childhood deaths have fallen from 12 million to 7.6 million. But before we pat ourselves on the back about global projects and partnerships, remember that there are 7.6 million children still dying. And nearly 2/3 of those children die of treatable, avoidable, preventable conditions like malnutrition, pneumonia, diarrhea, malaria, the big killers. Most of those can be prevented. So who can we help? If you look at the figures for the under 5-year mortality, and this is slightly out of date now, but you'll see the bottom line on this curve, on this graph here, on this table here, is that 51% of deaths occur in Africa, principally sub-Saharan Africa, 32% in South Asia, and in countries like India and China, where there is a very rapidly economic growth. So there are more issues. And the bottom line, little annotation, 49 countries, there have been no decrease in childhood mortality. And most of those are in countries where there is civil unrest or warfare. The challenges to overcome in twinning, because we use the term twinning rather than partnership, because we're not sure about marriage, but we're sure about twinning, linking people. Individual, community, and national poverty. It's the strongest correlation with life survival, because the country's wealth depends on how much they then pay per capita for health expenditure. No doctors, low numbers of nurses, and no medicines, no x-rays, no investigations. Lack of awareness, particularly, of signs and symptoms of disease, whatever that disease is, leads to misdiagnosis and deaths. Natural and man-made disasters divert money, clearly, but we don't well enough in our global activity look to see what the long-term dangers are, that we can try to prevent some of those acute episodes. The Democratic Republic of Congo has not reduced its child mortality for the last 20 or 30 years. Can we really give aid? Governments do. Can we really help them if they don't look after their children and their women? Now, the ideal steps, we think, in twinning or partnerships are that there has to be a recognition locally. This links a lot to what Liz says, in terms of not us saying, we want to aid you, they're saying, will you help us? But they have to have strong leadership locally. The beginning of a team developing to actually help with, if we do give aid. A stable civil society. If you don't have that, you are wasting your money, frankly. Local mobilization of the community to support that local leadership. That is crucial if, again, a partnership is going to work. And you have to get support of the relevant authorities. We're demonstrating in one of our projects the failure to do that leads to endless delays and bureaucracy and no progress. Then the local leader asks for help, and only then. And they ask. That's part of the real partnership. We have developed with colleagues all around the world this project component. It applies to our cancer studies, but it should really apply to all of us, I think. A locally produced 5-year plan. Not 1 year, not 2 years, not 3 years. There's a problem. Grant aid is usually limited. I recognise that we have now got longer term project funding, but it has to be limited because longer term means more money and there isn't enough money to go around. Our plans require aims, objectives, assessment measures, all defined precisely before you start. And that is produced by the local people. Then we visit and we argue about it with them, debate with them. Ultimately, it's their decision. But if somebody comes to us and say, we'd like to do bone marrow transplantation in Zambia, we say, if you're going to do bone marrow transplantation, you don't need us. Simple as that. Because that's not their major problem. Abandonment of treatment, refusal of treatment, early toxic deaths, and no access to treatment. That's their problem. And they admit it. Projects are then scrutinised. We then agree a programme, or not, as the case may be, and we put in place very strict clinical and financial governance. The success depends on long-term support, longer-term grant aid, and that cannot come from statutory bodies. It has to come from philanthropy and statutory bodies. Long-term sustainability is crucial right from the beginning. It's essential to devise the plan, and both the local lead and the partners from high-income countries have to look, who will carry this on? Will the government take it on? In some countries like Ghana where we work, the economy is rising, improving dramatically, and the government is beginning to take it seriously. NGOs. Since we started in Ghana, 4 local NGOs have been created. At the end of our 5-year plan, the country will be self-sufficient, we believe. Or it might be. And this touches on a point earlier. We are helping in Accra. We need to help in Kumasi and all across the country. And that may require a little bit more help. Local charities, overseas diaspora, that's helping us for Bangladesh, living in this country. Companies, there are very good philanthropic companies around the world. But we have to lobby and advocate, local lead and the external mentor. And external aid should decrease as the percentage of costs over time. So there is benefit, or there should be benefit for all of us involved in a partnership if we work at it, like in a marriage, like in a partnership. But they need to be long-term. You've got to give friendship, you've got to give love, you've got to give support and longer-term projects than the politicians. Now, sorry to be political, but politicians think 3 or 4 years before the next election. Myopic vision. You can understand that. However, Olympics today, nutrition tomorrow, is not the answer to this. This is a long-term global partnership. Credit to the government, this government, and previous governments, they are sticking at the 0.7% of GDP, not 25%, as some of the right-wing people would like you to believe. But the Americans, depending on the election, may cut out their aid. So we've got to realise that we all have to find money in multiple sources in order to do it. So partnerships are not appropriate or sustainable the way we too often do them in a disorganised fashion. So the fault is not the concept, the fault is ours in not doing it properly. And I'm sure all of you in the audience will vote for the motion because you think you're doing it properly. But just ask yourselves, are you really? And if you're not, we have to do better. Thank you for listening.